Hey everyone, this is the average Excel user here. In this video, I'm going to go through an example of using the SUMIFS function. The purpose of this function is to sum values within a cell range that matches a certain criteria. To start, let's take a look at the syntax of the function. This function is made up of two mandatory arguments, with the additional parts being optional, which you can tell because the arguments are surrounded by square brackets. The sum range argument is a cell range that contains all of the possible values that can be summed together. Criteria range 1 is the first cell range that is to be evaluated using the criteria expressed in criteria 1. Together, they search through a cell range for a specific criteria, and if the values meet that criteria, the corresponding values in the sum range are summed together. In this example, I have a dataset with black headers that contains the number of cars sold from my average car dealership by color and the date that it was sold. The dataset with blue headers are the cells that I will be calculating using the SUMIFS function. Let's start with the total number of cars sold by color and typing in our function here. Going back to our syntax, because we want to sum the number of cars sold, our sum range will be this cell range here. So I'm going to select this cell range and lock the cells by pressing F4 once. We want to know the total number of cars sold by color, which makes the color of the car a criteria. The color of the cars are in this cell range here. So I'm going to select this cell range and again lock the cells by pressing F4 once. Now we have the color in column G, but it's being covered by the formula. So I'm just going to type out G4, and then I'm going to lock the column component of that cell address by pressing F4 3 times. And then pressing enter. Now let's copy this formula down for the other colors as well. Now let's go back to the function itself. One thing to keep in mind when using the SUMIFS function is that the size of the sum range and criteria ranges need to be the same, or else the function will give you an error. So in other words, this blue rectangle needs to be the exact same size as this red one. Let's break down this function to see what it's doing. Over here, I have a check column in my dataset, and here I'm going to use the if function. If you want to see an example of the if function, you can check out my other video here. In this if function, my logical test will be to see if the color in my criteria range is equal to red. And if that's true, I want it to return to me the corresponding value in the sum range, which is the number of cars sold. And if it's false, return to me 0. Then I'll fill the rest of the column and use the sum function to sum the values in that column. And just like that, we arrive to the same answer. 44 cars were sold that were red. 44 cars were sold that were red. Let's move on to the next column, which is to calculate the number of cars sold before July 1st by color. Unlike the first column, this column has two criteria, one for the date and one for the color. Since this column is similar to the previous one, we can start by copying this cell over, taking care of the color criteria. Now since we need to incorporate the date into the function, I can use this cell range here. I can select this area as my criteria range 2 and lock the cells by pressing F4. Now for criteria 2, in the SUMIFS function, there's a specific way to enter dates, and this is by using the date function, which requires the year, which is 2019, the month, which is 7, and the day, which is the 1st. Since we want to include dates before July 1st, however, we need to include the less than operator. To use operators within a SUMIFS function, you need to surround the operator with double quotation marks and use the ampersand to concatenate the two together. So let's just close this function off, and the answer is 26. Now I'm going to fill the rest of the column. Let's break down this function to see what it's doing. Since there are two criteria to be met, I will be using the AND function in my if function, specifically in the logical test portion of my if function, which is this area here. In the if function, my logical test will be to see if the color is equal to red and if the date is less than July 1st. And then I'll fill the rest of the column. And just like that, we arrive to the same answer, 26 and 26. Now on to the next and final column, which is to calculate the number of cars sold between March 1st and September 1st by color. Now, even though it looks like there is only two criteria to be met, there are really three. One for dates after March 1st, one for dates before September 1st, and one for the color. Now since this column is similar to the previous one, we can start by copying this cell over. Since we want to include dates after March 1st, we have to change this less than operator to greater than and change the date to March 1st. I can then add a third criteria by copying this portion of the function, changing this to less than, and changing the date to September 1st. And then fill the rest of the column. We can break down this function one last time to see what it's doing. Since there is three criteria to be met now, I can add a third logical test to my AND function within my if function. So first I will modify this to say greater than March, and then copy this argument change this to less than, and this to September. And then fill the rest of the column. And one more time, we arrive to the same answer, 35 and 35. Now to summarize the SUMIFS function, it's used to add values in a cell range that matches a certain criteria. And really, it's just a combination of both the sum and if functions. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you want to see more of this content, subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.